Following a ferocious killing on the streets of London. Two men shouting Islamist slogans hacked to death another man thought to be a serving soldier near a military barracks in Woolwich in the city's southeast. The government is treating the incident as a suspected terrorist attack. The police who were called to the scene shot and wounded the two suspects who made no attempt to escape. They're now being treated in hospitals. The Metropolitan Police Commissioner Bernard Hogan-Howe says the counter-terrorism unit is leading the investigation.
We've made 2 arrests in relation to that awful crime. We now ask that people obviously give us the opportunity to thoroughly investigate this crime to make sure we get to the bottom of who committed it and why. And we urge that people remain calm during that process.
The former federal parliament...
Now, the reason that English policeman was appealing for calm is because at 9 o'clock this morning, so 3 hours ago, the news was that there were busloads of neo-Nazi, white supremacist, far right-wing English fascist political supporters converging on the area around Woolwich looking for black people to throw stones at, to chase. There were people twittering on how they'd seen black people being chased in public squares in London. So I'm assuming there's going to be more after the news in the current affairs section, and I will attempt to keep this camera paused and record a little bit more.
The man on a London street then launched into a political tirade filmed by passers-by, all the while still brandishing the bloody knife. And Amnesty International takes a swipe at Australia in its latest annual report, accusing the government of using refugees for political point scoring.
Well, sorry about that little teaser for the Amnesty International. But I did manage to hit the pause button, and by cycling the zoom backwards and forwards I seem to be able to keep the camera holding on pause while we wait for them to get through.
Reported a loss of $140 million for the 2012 financial year, totalling $600 million over the past 5 years.
So, fireplaces are wonderful things, aren't they? I'll just hit the pause again and listen to the radio, and when we get back to the story about the 2 black men screaming in Arabic while they chopped up a serving military person outside Woolwich Arsenal Barracks in London, because I think that's probably more interesting than why they're closing the car plant in Victoria. It doesn't really matter what the political agenda of the people who did the deed were. What I suspect they will have achieved is make life increasingly miserable and difficult for any Muslims, particularly the ones with dark skin in the United Kingdom, for the immediate foreseeable future. Because, to the paranoid, if one of them can go off and do that, then any one of them can. So, well, I suppose if you're trying to create racial tension and dissent, somebody has to go crazy, bare-ass kamikaze like that. So it strikes me as either a completely lunatic, radical act of a couple of mad-ass individuals, a bit like the Chechenian Front for the Liberation of Dagestan via blowing up the finish line of the Boston Marathon, or maybe somebody really wants to get serious about sowing dissent. And of course, when you sow the wind, you reap the whirlwind. Anyway, like I said, I'll pause this and wait for the news story.
On air through ABC Radio and Radio Australia, streaming live on our website and via podcast. This is The World Today. And still to come on the program as residents begin the arduous task of cleaning up after this week's deadly tornado in Oklahoma, we speak to one meteorologist who predicts many more tornadoes before the end of June. And the government publishes a list of readily available chemicals that can be used for terrorism in a new campaign to get people to report suspicious activity.
If you think that I'm being irresponsible in giving away bomb-making instructions to terrorists, I can assure you that, unfortunately, these instructions are already easily accessible via the internet.
But first, British authorities are calling for calm on the streets of London following the audacious and gruesome murder of a man in what's been described in some quarters as a terrorist attack. The two men believed to be responsible remain in separate hospitals after being shot by police at the scene of the crime in the suburb of Woolwich. Europe correspondent Barbara Miller reports.
Several hundred supporters of the self-declared anti-Islamic group, the English Defence League, clashed with police late in the evening in Woolwich. The group rallied its supporters following the murder of a man in broad daylight in circumstances that are particularly disturbing. After hacking the man to death with machetes or meat-cleavers, possibly beheading him, the two attackers stayed at the scene of the crime talking to passers-by and reportedly encouraging them to take photos. In chilling vision shown by the news channel ITV, one of them, his hands covered in blood, a meat-cleaver in his hands, allows himself to be filmed.
I apologise that women had to witness this today, but in our land, our women have to see the same. You people will never be safe. Remove your government, they don't care about you.
It's not clear what land or lands the man is referring to. When he's finished, he lumbers back over to the body and talks to the other alleged attacker. Sometime later, the police arrived, and reportedly after the men moved towards them with weapons in their hands, both attackers were shot and wounded. The British government is still shying away from saying this was definitely a terrorist attack. Prime Minister David Cameron.
There are strong indications that it is a terrorist incident.
London's Mayor Boris Johnson went a little further.
The Home Secretary's just chaired COBRA, and I'm afraid it is overwhelmingly likely now that this was indeed a terrorist incident.
And the fact that the government's Emergency Response Committee, COBRA, has met indicates that overwhelmingly likely probably means definitely. Professor Michael Clark is director of the Security and Defence think tank, the Royal United Services Institute.
No question about it that these people were acting in an Al-Qaeda-related way. They behead people. That's what Al-Qaeda does. That's what Sunni Muslims do. Shia Muslims don't do that. And Al-Qaeda is a Sunni organisation. They use the rhetoric that has been imported more or less directly from Ayman al-Zawahiri, the leader of Al-Qaeda, and other Al-Qaeda spokespeople over the years. And the intent to kill a soldier has been expressed many times. There are at least 5 people in prison at the moment who are there partly because they were trying to kill British service personnel. So this has all the hallmarks of an Al-Qaeda-related incident. Everything about them makes them look like people who were inspired by the Al-Qaeda message.
Professor Michael Clark says the two men may have been acting independently.
The body language and their lack of thinking about what they were doing and the way they were acting gives me the impression that they might well have been clean skinned, as they say in the security service, and acting on their own motivation. I'd be a bit surprised if they were connected to some larger network.
The attack took place adjacent to an army barracks, and it's very likely that the dead man is a serving soldier. But the government's not confirming or denying that. Sir Bernard Haugen-Ho is the Metropolitan Police Commissioner.
This afternoon we've seen a horrific attack on the streets of London. A terrible murder has occurred. We've launched an investigation led by the Counter-Terrorist Command, and we've made 2 arrests in relation to that awful crime. We now ask that people obviously give us the opportunity to thoroughly investigate this crime to make sure we get to the bottom of who committed it and why.
Police are calling for anyone with video footage of the attack or its aftermath to come forward. This is Barbara Miller in London reporting for The World Today.
Well, Dr. Derek Campbell is a British community leader who advised the UK government on antisocial behaviour and race relations during the 2011 London riots. I spoke to him earlier about the attack, and he says there's still much work to be done by moderate Muslim leaders to address discontent within their own communities.
In fairness, we've listened to the statements of the individuals involved in this horrific attack, and it's quite clear they're making political statements, referring to governments being brought down and removing soldiers from their land. But at the same time, we still don't know enough information to be really clear about whether it is specifically a terrorist attack. And if it is a terrorist attack, we're certainly nowhere near knowing who, if anybody else, is behind it.
Might it highlight a broader underbelly of discontent with the government, perhaps broader concern about the British government's foreign policy, for example?
There will always be individuals who will have an issue with that. So the government are very, very clear about trying to address the issues of radicalisation, of monitoring the movement of individuals, of covert surveillance, etc.
I note that Islamic leaders in the UK have responded swiftly to this. Does it suggest a depth of concern that the Islamic community might suffer some sort of backlash?
The swift action to distance themselves and to condemn the actions today is welcomed. It's definitely needed. But in saying that, most people for many years, including myself, have been saying that the best way to address the homegrown terrorists or the homegrown jihadists or people who are disconcerted with the Western philosophy has got to come from within that community. So there is still a lot of pressure on those moderate Muslims and from the members from the Islamic community to do much more to address the issues that's happening within their own specific community.
The alleged perpetrators here were young men in their 20s and 30s. They were wearing trainers, jeans, speaking with a very local London accent. Does this suggest a new face to terrorism, if that's what it is?
Well, if that's what it is, we need to be really concerned that looking outside of the borders and expecting the terrorists to fly in on a plane and come from outside, the focus must firmly remain firstly on the home soil. If we've got individuals, which we clearly have, because the 7/7 bombers were homegrown, people who have been involved in terrorist activities, a lot of them are homegrown. They are people within the country who have acclimatised to the country. They were brought up here, they've been to school here, they've been to university. They are, in many cases, upstanding people within the community. And that is the biggest problem, that a terrorist doesn't look like a terrorist. These individuals weren't in unusual clothing, they were just regular guys by the looks of it. And that's the problem, you actually don't know who a terrorist is. So the problem we are facing within this country, and I'm sure within other countries, is that the level of suspicion where you start to just, worry about your neighbour, who you've grown with, you've been to school with. You have no idea what's going on in their mind, and because you don't know that, it's very difficult to prepare yourself. And what we mustn't do is fall under the spell and allow ourselves to be terrorised by the uncertainty of who a terrorist actually is. That's the problem we're facing.
There are reports that police have been involved in running battles with suspected right-wing militants who've taken to the streets near the scene of the killing. It would seem that right-wing militants have been very quickly mobilised. What does that tell you about the depth of feeling there?
Unfortunately, incidents like this only serve to stoke up the concerns and the passions of individuals who have concerns against certain things that go on in our country. For example, what they see as a rise of the Islamic community.
How strong is that anti-Islamic sentiment in London?
It's not as pronounced as it was a year or so ago, where we had what we call the English Defence League, who were very, very vocal. They were marching and holding, spot rallies to raise the issue against Islam, with over 33,000 officers, police officers, the Metropolitan Police. They are, really on top of the intelligence.
I wonder, though, whether there are extreme elements on both sides of this, either the extreme right-wing and the extreme Islamic elements of the community might be galvanised by this, and might things get out of hand?
There's always that danger that the extremists will be empowered by this and will, use the opportunity to spread propaganda. There's also the spotlight that's been shown on the Muslim community, the Islamic community, who again will be feeling under a tremendous pressure and great expectations placed on them. All of that, if we're not careful, that can go one of two ways. It can either go where you have people trying to capitalise and exploit the situation, or you can have people retrenching back into their community, and you have that effect. So at this present time as we speak, we're just not sure which way things are going to go.
That's British Government Advisor Dr. Derek Campbell speaking to me earlier. Amnesty International has accused...
Okay, well, they were talking about Amnesty International. It says that Australia's exploiting asylum seekers for political purposes, but I think we got enough meat on the movie with just the idea that some freelance Muslim extremists have decided to take meat cleavers and machetes and a pistol to chop up a British military person outside the Woolwich Arsenal barracks. And that's going to reverberate throughout the Western democracies and stir up an enormous amount of shit. I don't know who's planned it, but dear oh dear oh dear. Sometimes there are people who reckon I'm a bit of an idiot for living on the very outside edge of a society that I don't fit anyway. But when I listen to stuff like that, and this morning on the AM program, there was an enormous amount of in-depth material about how a couple of women just